Welcome to another episode of Tell Me About It with Jakeel. I'm Jakeel. Today we have a very gracious guest with us today, Shawntae. Um, and like I do with all my guests, I ask this pivotal question. So, Shawntae, we have a lot of different experiences together. Talk about an experience that you've had with me.
The first one that comes to mind is when I first came to MiraCosta. So you were BSU president at the time. It was the first time I was really in like an all black space. Like I'm just gonna be real. Like I come from a multiracial family, so white mom, black dad. It's kind of separated from both sides, so really just within my own intimate family. And so it was the first time I was really in an all black space. So I walked in, people were playing spades, dominoes, yelling across the table. And I just remember, being like, oh my God, this feels so like I could sit in this space. Like this feels like a space I can actually, be myself in. I believe we were planning UBSC at the time. So I got invited to some of the meetings. And then I don't know how the thought came up of me running for BSU president the next year, but I did. I don't know how that happened. But I was a member for a little less than a year before I ran. So I just kind of remember you really, teaching me a lot of things about being the president and the importance of, that space that we had at MiraCosta and the importance of UBSC and just kind of showing me the ropes and being real and honest with me about what leadership and being a black leader specifically was going to be like. So,
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of how I view it, how I see it too. I think my first kind of experiences with you, you probably don't even realize, probably because you were in the Summer Bridge circle, and I didn't. So I didn't do Summer Bridge, which was weird because I was like, how did they not come to El Camino and grab me for Summer Bridge? But
right.
um, me and my brother, we would always just go to MiraCosta and go to the BSU room and stuff like that, even during the summer, and we would kind of interact here and there with the summer bridge students and stuff like that. And then your summer bridge group also had some of my close friends or friends in it now, and friends siblings and stuff like that. So like I would watch you interact and stuff like that, and so those were like my first experiences. And then when it came to like BSU and like we had a conversation, like me, Phil, and a lot of other BSU leaders at that point about like what does it look like when we leave? Because like we had like a very strong 3 years of us doing a lot of stuff for MiraCosta, us doing black shit for MiraCosta. And we're like, when all of us leave, because we're all leaving at the same time, what the fuck's gonna happen? Um, so we had a conversation and we were literally like, well, Shawntae is somebody that we know who actually like be dedicated to the role and want to see like black students achieve the success that they need, but also like thinking about them like as people instead of just as students. And then some of the other people were like, oh, they were involved in UBSC planning, they were involved in some of our lives and stuff like that. And so we were like, all right, let's just hope that this this goes the way that it intends to. And I think for the most part, it went really well. I think after your year, who was it, Nick? I think Nick.
Yeah.
And from Nick, it just. But that's just how it happens in the BSU world and stuff like that. It's just like you get some strong years, you get some not so strong years, and you get pressure and stuff like that. But yes, so that's Shawntae and I's early experiences together. We have a bevy of experiences from like family being somewhat interconnected, um, to just random things about BSU and about Black organizing and stuff like that. So we have a lot of different experiences together. But today we're going to be talking about our experiences as young professionals, particularly as Black professionals in this field of higher education. So just to give some background to Shawntae, Shawntae already had mentioned BSU president, right? Summer Bridge alum, master's degree holder, PhD soon holder, sociology professor, right? I'm missing a whole bunch of other stuff, but that's the essence of Shawntae, which is crazy to see because when we first met and where we're at now, I'm like, she has a master's degree. She's going to a PhD program, sociology professor. I have a master's degree, for sure not going into a PhD program, right? Still in higher education. Both of us products of MiraCosta. Both of us ended up working back at MiraCosta. Shawntae still being at MiraCosta and
Wow.
me just dipping up out of there. So we're going to try to get into a lot of our experiences just navigating what it was like being students at MiraCosta and some of the struggles and barriers, and then being staff and faculty and still some of the barriers and stuff, but how we kind of navigate through it. So, Shawntae, my first question to you, right, is just what was the biggest transition from being a student at MiraCosta to being a staff member at MiraCosta?
Oh man. I think just on a very basic level, beginning to care what people thought of me. I feel like as a student, I was really like students have a lot more power than like we give them credit for. Like you can enter a lot of spaces and just say what you want to say and not really have to worry about like how people are reading you. Like you can walk in, say what you got to say and dip out. You never have to really see them again or engage with that committee again, or maybe it's a one-time committee that you attend, but when you transition to more of a professional role, you really have to think about how you say things. And that's not something I was really good at when I first transitioned. Like I was used to, as a student, I'm very vocal. Like say it right when I think about it, don't process, just say it. Right? And when you become like a professional, and you're not really viewed in that student light, students get a little bit more leeway. It's like
Hmm.
you can tell, well, maybe there's still, we'll work on professional development of how
Yeah.
to talk to committees. You can kind of get away with more, but when you step into that staff or that faculty role, there's an expectation that you know what space you're in and you're going to quote like act accordingly. So you still say what you want to say, but you kind of have to think twice about the impact or like the consequences of what you're going to say and who's in the room. You have to read the room a lot more. Like I remember as a student, I didn't care if I was talking to a dean, uh, the college president, which I was lucky to have an amazing college president at the time. So never really had that issue. But, I didn't really care about titles in the sense of like, all right, I still want to get this done and I still have this issue. So I'm gonna do it how I want, but as a professional, it's like, okay, this person's a dean, they work for so and so, and I work under X, Y, and Z. And so you really have to like understand the institutional structure. And as a
Yeah.
student, you just don't care.
Yeah.
You don't
Yeah.
have to care.
Yeah.
You're taking classes. No one's paying you unless, student worker and, things like that. But you don't really have anyone to answer to.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah. That's, I think, too, very similar, right? Is I think one of the biggest things that was well known about me as a student was I said whatever the hell I wanted to say. And I think when I became a staff member, I still led with that mentality and understood, like, oh shit, there are repercussions now. Like every time I opened my mouth to say things that were, I guess, not seen as professional or popular, it was always three more meetings that I had to have afterwards. And I was like, oh shit, like, I guess I can't say that to a dean or to a director or a coordinator and things like that because they view it as questioning their competence or questioning their authority or positionality. And I'm like, oh, I really just wanted you to advocate more for black students. Like that's literally all I wanted to get the point across, but my bad. And it's like I think I had to learn to be either conforming enough to say what I need to say without code switching because I just can't do that shit,
Right.
and or I would just be like, how can I do what I want them to do within my role, so that I didn't have to deal with like having to be vocal in a certain space.
Mhm.
Uh, but that's just like transitioning from student to like professional, right? And that's not even throwing in like race, right? Throwing in we
Yeah.
black, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? So, and that's what I really want to get more into is just like, the experience for anyone going into higher ed from being a student of the college that they were at to being an employee to the college that they were once students, right? You're going to have struggles, right?
Right.
And one of that is understanding that difference, right? Like your student voice way powerful than your professional voice.
Mhm.
But for us, right, we were not only students of the college and then employees, we were also Black students of the college, and not only Black students, Black vocal students who was known on campus. And
Yeah.
so our experiences are drastically different in that regard. And so what would you say is one of the biggest like aha moments that you had when you became a staff member when it became a issue about Black people?
Ooh, so I was the only Black person who worked in my space.
Mm,
So there was, I think the one time that like I've always been, especially coming from like a student leader in BSU, like I've always been aware that I'm Black in every space I walk in. And not only that, I'm a Black woman in every space I walk in. And I have an attitude. And like so that, all of those things kind of pile up to who I am. But being a staff member where I was, I had to deal with a lot of sometimes very aggressive students and like students who were unhappy. And it seemed I started to notice this pattern of like, like why, I've dealt with that student before and they're just flat out disrespectful when they walk up to my desk.
mm,
Or like students walk in and don't even look at me. I sat in the very front pretty much and just walk right past to the person who's not even like making eye contact with them. And so I started to notice that there was this lack of like visibility, like hyper visible as the only Black person, but also like invisible in a lot of like problem solving situations. So there was like, I ended up being someone who ended up, I was one of the most senior people in my position after like year two. And I started to notice, like, okay, I know the answers to all of this, but why do they want to hear it come from
mm,
someone else? Right.
mm,
Like, and I know why, right? Like, I know being a Black woman, it's like, are you sure? Do you not want to go check with him over there? And I'm like, he's been there for 2 months. Like, I'm telling you, but if you want to hear it from his mouth, and I had a lot of reoccurring situations like that, where being the only Black person, the only Black woman in that space, I was constantly assumed that I was like a student worker or like, oh, are you new here? Like, I just helped you last week. My hair's just different, So there was a lot of like lack of, understanding or respect for my credibility in the space. And I had worked there for a long time. Even when I was new there, like I caught on very quickly. And yet there was still like a lot of students, particularly white students, if we're just being honest, that just did not want to hear things come from my mouth. Like they just wanted to hear it from anyone who did not look like me.
that's I don't think in my experience that I dealt with that to that degree because I think just different areas we're working in, right? I'm working more of the student life aspect and you're working more of like student support and like, academic like
Yeah.
support. Um but for me it was more so like I had so many like people questioning my position, right? And I think what that was like I would see like people come up to me and be like, "I have a question. Can you get your boss?" And I'm like, "You can ask me with the name tag. Thank you very much. I put on this dumbass button down for you, these stupid ass slacks,
For
okay, and wear this dumbass name tag for you to come and ask me for my boss, who's just going to ask you to ask me."
real.
And so particularly working in student life and leadership, student activities, wherever the hell it's called now, right? I dealt with a lot of people walking up to the front desk and being like, "Oh, maybe you can't answer my questions" and stuff like that. And even from, I had Black students doing the same thing, but it's different from them because they're not used to seeing Black people in those spaces. So
Yeah.
it's almost surprising. They're just like, "Oh man, who is this? Is he a student worker? Like, what is he doing here?" Like, and then for the students who knew what position I was in, like, and quite frankly, again, were the white students. and they would come up to me and they would ask me questions and I would give them an answer, and they would act like my answer wasn't good enough or that it wasn't truthful and stuff like that, especially when it came to like clubs and organizations or booking a room or doing an event. And I'd be like, yo, this is what I get paid to do. Like, I need you to also understand that if I wasn't doing a good job, they would fire me. Like, I need you to understand that they would not have a problem firing me. I am replaceable. Understand that. So I have to do good in my role.
Yeah.
Um, but I think too, when it comes to like the black students in my role, I found a very gray area in like trying to support them while also allowing them to kind of explore the things that they want to explore. And what I mean by that is more so like I know that like just because I'm in a staff role doesn't mean that I go up to every black student and go, "You need this support, take it." And so it's just more so like, "All right, I need you to know, hey, I'm a black male in this space that you probably don't normally see black men in. This
Mhm.
is where my office is. This is where my desk is. You can ask me questions if you need support and then get out." Instead of being like, "You need to come see me at this point at this time." Um, because I think for the first semester of working as a full-time staff member, um, I got called Uncle Tom quite a bit, and I think a lot of it was because they weren't used to like me in that space and
Mm,
like me like tucking in my shirt and like all these different things that I didn't even want to do because I was trying to conform to this idea of professionalism that I really don't conform to anymore.
yeah.
Um, but it was just like I was like, "Oh no, I'm not Uncle Tom. I'm really trying to support you, but you're not gonna believe me." So like, I all right, I'll take it. Like, if you're gonna
Yeah.
call me Uncle Tom and I still get to support you, fine. And so I had to deal with that. But what would you say was one of the biggest challenges that you had when adjusting to your role as a staff member?
One of the biggest challenges would definitely be, I mean, I think it's kind of similar to what I said before a little bit, like adjusting to being like the balancing being assertive, right? Because a lot of what I had to deal with, I mean, I had to put my foot down and be like, no, this is what it is. You know, you're dealing with, students in academics, and oftentimes maybe they're on probation or, they're in often very vulnerable situations. Like they need a class and they're all full. Like so the emotions of students oftentimes was really unpredictable. And so just really having to balance between like, okay, so I know I can't be like my colleague and be like, I said there's no classes. I'm going to help the next student. Can you step away?
Yeah.
Like I didn't have the freedom to do that. One, if I did, because I had to try it a few times, like, all right, let me just try his method over there because they're not listening to me. Like they're just still standing at my desk, like I'm gonna work some magic and make this class appear. So I would try those methods that my white male colleagues in particular would do, and they just backfired. Like oh my gosh, you're so rude. Like, why do you have to have an attitude? I can't believe you just said that to me. And I'm just like, okay, like he said that, like he said that 5 minutes ago, and there was no response to that. And so it was really a lot because I'm a very just say it as it is person, anyways. And for people who don't know me, I can come off with an attitude, especially when I have to be very like, no, we don't have any appointments until this date. No, we don't have any counselors available. Just be very like firm. I really had to find a balance between being firm, but also understanding I'm the only Black woman in that space. And so, what that comes off as, I got called all types of stuff. Like, if you were to like take a survey of students of how many students thought I had an attitude, the moment I walked up, the moment they walked up to my desk, oftentimes it was like, like, oh, are you okay? Are you having a bad day? I'm just like, no, like, I feel like I'm a pretty smiley person, but what would, there's like this assumption that I constantly have to be like people pleasing and like,
Yeah.
that's a thing that comes with womanhood in general, but Black womanhood as well is like smile, you
Mm,
know, be very welcoming and which I am, but not to students who don't necessarily reciprocate that. It's like
yeah.
you come up and you're like slamming your binder on my desk and expecting me to be like, oh my gosh, how can I serve you? Like, I'm just like, okay, that was, that was unnecessary, but how can I help you? Like, so still having to stand my ground in spaces, but also knowing that I'm viewed very differently. I'm not given as much liberty. I saw colleagues flat out yell at students before, and I could never. Like, I stood up
Never.
one time. I stood up one time at a student because he was leaning over my desk and I just kind of had to get a little bit of authority. So I stood up. I'm like, I felt like he was really like, hovering, leaning over my desk. So I stood up and he was like, oh my God, what are you going to do? Are you going to fight me now? I'm just like, no, but also
Yeah.
I'm trying to get some respect.
That's and there's so many different things in that, right? A lot of it, and I don't have some of these experiences, one, because I'm a black male.
Yeah.
And while I do have some experiences as a black male that you probably will never experience,
Right.
it's the same on the other side, right? And a lot of it is people aren't going to walk up to me and question, like, think that they can like get one over me. Most of the time people don't approach me because they think I'm intimidating or aggressive, right?
Yeah.
And then when you talk to me, you're like, "Oh, he's just really nice. Like he's very kind." I mean, he may be rude sometimes, but like he's really kind. Like like, but I think too, like in your like experiences, it's like, you know, people who know you, like I know you personally. Yes, you have a bit of an attitude to people like to like in interacting, like, but it's not like you're not like someone who is an aggressive slash like attitudey type of person.
Right.
Especially like I think a lot of people don't when it comes to black people in education roles, I don't think a lot of people understand that we have to be a certain way, not only to like do our job, but to protect our job. So like what I would normally say in a situation where a student's being aggressive, I can't say it unless I know that nobody else is watching and
Hmm.
that I can whisper it, and then it's that student's word against my word. But a lot of it is like I can't tell you half of the things that some of my white counterparts have said, right? And even some of my other POC counterparts have said, right? Being a black male or, in your case being a black woman, like we can't say certain things without people either, you know, there's like 10 different sides to it. It's the positive, but like still microaggressive and stereotype side of it where it's like, oh, calm down, Jamal. And you're like, see, that's not funny. Like, that's not funny. I get what you're doing. You're trying to connect, trying to sarcastic and humor, but that's unnecessary and like a little offensive, right?
Yeah.
And then there's the other side of it where it's all like, oh, he was being so aggressive and mean to me. And it's all like, no, I was being assertive because you weren't listening. And because you weren't listening, you caused a distraction within my office, which now is more issues that I have to deal with. Right. And especially if you're in a field like counseling, it's like there's going to be students coming in constantly to come see counselors, to come get information. So if you can derail them from seeing a counselor by answering their questions, that's the whole role. Like
Yeah.
I'm trying to make it so you don't have to make an appointment with the counselor. Like I'm trying to help you. So you don't think that I'm right, then why are you here?
Yeah.
You can set up appointment online, you call it in. What you walk in here for? Like and
Exactly.
so and you can't say that though. You can't say that because they'll be like, "Oh, they didn't wanna help me." It's like, "No, I'm trying to help you."
Yeah.
And so in my experience, I think, one of the biggest challenges that I was very shocked to know, was particularly in the area that I worked in, particularly in student life, they don't wanna support Black students as much as they say they wanna support Black students. And what I mean by that, right? It's a very blanket statement. It's very clear what I mean by it. But what I
Mhm.
also mean by it is like they really are like, we have services that are for Black students. Don't tailor the services that we want to provide for everybody to Black students.
Mm.
And it's like, well, I work in student life, clubs and organizations, all of these different things, right? And particularly in my role when I was at MiraCosta, right? I was in a very different role that me and Melanie kind of like sat down and created.
Mm.
and because there was nothing like it. And thank Melanie for trusting me into taking the role, the direction that I took it. Um, but like I was providing workshops for all the clubs and organizations on like decision making, on budgeting, on how to spending bills, all these different things. And the only clubs that were utilizing the workshops were BSU, Metcha, and GSA. And so I'm like, I'm not going to like go out of my way and tell every club to come to my workshops if they don't want to come. They
Right.
know the service is there. They can come if they want to. But what I started to notice was they were like, why are you doing these workshops and why is BSU the only one coming? And I'm like, I don't have control over who comes. I'm glad BSU's coming. Like, as someone who formerly was BSU president, this is great to see. I was like, and then there was just a lot of like confusion with like, oh, he's only supporting black students. And it's like, if that's what you think I'm doing in my role, then you have a very jaded view of what my role is. And so I started to really notice that conversations revolving around supporting black students started to be like, Jakeel, why are you spending more time with BSU than any other club? Jakeel, why are you doing this? Jakeel, why are you doing that? And I'd be like, what do you want me to do in my job that is particularly pertaining to all the clubs? Because I'm doing that. And I'm also supporting BSU because they're in the club room asking me questions.
Yeah.
So what do you want me to do? Do you want me to limit my services to BSU? Because then I'm a disservice to students.
Mhm.
And then it became more and more political, so to speak. It was like, oh, well, we can't have you being a BSU advisor. Oh, we can't have you do all these different things. And I'm like, I need y'all to make up y'all mind. Do y'all want me to support clubs and organizations, or do you not want me to support clubs and organizations? And so I started to realize that, like, oh, because we don't have equity in our title, we're not allowed to support Black students. Like,
Yeah.
and so I started to be a little bit more vocal on that aspect, and it didn't serve me well, but it didn't not serve me well. It was 50-50. It was like, oh, we know Jakeel's here to support Black students. But Jakeel, we also want you to support all students. I'm like, I am. I'm available to support all students. That's why I sit at this front desk. I'm the first face you see when the doors open. But it's not my fault that because I'm a black male, the only people who seem to approach me are black students and brown students. Everybody else kind of goes, "Mm, we'll wait till his shift is over." And I'll be like, well, sucks for you because I work a 9 to 5.
All day.
So you gonna see me for the whole day. Uh,
Yeah.
so that was one of the biggest things is like they do not, and when I mean they, I mean institutions, and I
Mm.
mean institutions nationwide,
Yeah.
worldwide, globally, do not support Black students like they say they do.
No.
They don't. They have all of these fancy terms like inclusion and diversity, and a lot of what that means is like, hey, we're going to put a whole bunch of people of color in the same space and provide them all the same services that we're already providing all the other students. And it's all like, great, that should have kind of been like from the start, but don't call it diversity because you just put a whole bunch of people in a room that don't look like each other without addressing the issues of all the people in the room. And
Right.
don't call it inclusive if you're literally just putting black people or brown people, but I'm particularly going to talk about black people. You're putting black people into spaces where there's a large level of racism, a large level of white supremacy, a large level of disservitude. Like, you're like, how is that inclusion? You literally just took me out of a space that I was not thriving in to put me in a space where I'm now not thriving in front of people. So
Yeah.
it's like don't do the like those are the things I'm like, you're doing a disservice to these students, but you're claiming diversity and you're like, look, now we have 4% black people instead of 3%. And you're just like, that's not because of you saying inclusion and diversity. That's
Right.
because the people who are rooted in like black outreach are doing their jobs
Yeah.
successfully. And so it's just hard. That's what I learned. It's like, oh, it's just hard. Like if you're not willing to risk your job to like support black students,
Oh,
then
yeah.
like you can't do it. Like
Yeah.
it's just very difficult.
Yeah.
Um, but on top of like us, being, I hate the word professional, but professionals, right, in higher ed, we're also significantly younger than a lot of our counterparts. And I was talking about it not too long ago with a coworker. It's like, as crazy as it seems, at my age, I now have 10 years of higher ed experience. And I
Mhm.
was thinking about that and I was like, oh, I guess I do. Like, looking
Yeah.
at my resumes, I'm like, oh wow, I have 10 years of higher ed experience, but I still am not 30. And so people are just like, wait, how's that possible? I'm like, because when I was a student, I was an involved student
Yeah.
worker, working in these different functional areas. The moment I graduated, I came back and I've just been working ever since.
Mhm.
And even though I have 10 years of experience, when I'm in spaces, they act like my 10 years is 2 years. And they act like, oh, no, no, you weren't here around in the 90s and the early 2000s about how this institution has changed. I'm like, yeah, but just because I wasn't here doesn't mean I don't understand it.
Yeah.
And so, like, my age and being black, because we're black, we are blessed with the melanin to look 20 for the rest of our lives. People always assume, oh, you're 18, oh, you're 20, oh, you're an undergrad. And I'm like, yo, I have a master's degree in
What's
counseling.
up?
So let me tell you some issues that you're experiencing right now. So on that aspect, right? Because you're younger than me, right? And so, and you're a faculty member, and that's what I want to get into, right? Because when I started as a faculty member, I was the exact same age that you are now. And
Mhm.
the experiences of being a young faculty member are unique. And the one thing I would say about being a young faculty member that you have as a positive is that students look at you and they go, oh, my teacher's young. That's about it. Everything else is a challenge. What would you say is when you started to notice that your age played a factor in your job?
Oh, man. I mean, I've always been very, like, not I don't wanna call it self-conscious, but a little bit about my age, because I started college when I was 18, barely turned 18, like, barely, and I went straight through, like, straight through. So I got my master's degree when I was 24. I think that math is right. 24, 25-ish. And so I've always kind of been the youngest in all of the spaces I've been in. But I think I became more aware of it when I stepped into my faculty role and recognized, especially at a community college, because we have a lot of adult reentry students,
Hmm.
a lot, like a larger percentage than you would get anywhere else at a community college. And so I just remember thinking, like, before I started teaching, and I talked to, Bruce about this. I talked to a lot of people about it. I'm like, so what do I do? Like, I don't really want them to know my age. Like, how do I age myself just a little bit? Like, make them think I'm like 30-ish. I still don't ever give my age away. I say like late 20s, even though, I'm barely past the mid 25s. And so just kind of that, I think it's more internal for me. I haven't really had anybody, well, my summer bridge students called my age out, but that's a little different. They're high schoolers, they're coming into college and they see me and they're like, wait, um, are you qualified to teach? Like, you look like you could be in high school. And so they were kind of the first ones to question my age, but almost in like a playful way. And I think it was actually more motivating to them to see that, okay, I'm only 26, and just 7 years ago I was in y'all's exact same position. Like, you could literally, see yourself being 26 and teaching because you see me. And that was unique to Summer Bridge,
Yeah.
because when I taught my 101 that fall, it was very different. It was very much like I really had to be very conscious and very cautious with not revealing my age, because there comes like this, oh, well, do you really know? And I feel like I really always had to assert, like, I got my master's degree, like, kind of reiterate that multiple times. Whereas when I was working with high schoolers, I never had to do that. It was like they accepted that I was a college professor, because to them, 26 is kind of old,
Yeah.
like they're 17, 18 years old. And then I go into a class where I have 30-year-olds and veterans and like people who have served in the military and single moms who are in their 30s, and I'm just like 26 with a master's degree. And so I feel like I really had to kind of always like remind them like, by the way, like I have a master's degree in this. Everything I'm saying is factual.
Mhm.
And I think kind of with that, I'm a black woman too. And like
Mhm.
a lot of them, I did a survey in my class. Like a lot of them, I was their first black professor, period.
Mm.
Period. So you have that, whereas it's like, I've never heard someone like you who looks like you teach a class. So there's kind of that questioning that happens, whether they admit it or not, right? Like black people have not been viewed as intellectuals in,
Mhm.
in normal, in K through 12 or in higher ed. So then you get a young black college professor and you're just like, you're old, like you could be my child. Like I had a student tell me, like, you look like you could be my kid. And I'm thinking to myself, I probably could,
Yeah.
but I have children, I kind of pull that I pull that card too. I'm like, yeah, I'm a mom. And so I was almost like I try and age myself a little bit or like insert, my degree and like my experiences to validate
Mm.
me. And it's like I shouldn't have to do that.
Mhm.
But I do,
Yeah.
I do. So it's a struggle in not wanting to do that, but realizing like I almost have to get the respect of the class,
Yeah. That's one of the hardest things that I think I learned very early on, in being in a faculty role. But also, I think my personality too is a little different. Where one, I rarely give a fuck what people think about me in general. But two, like I try to. I think because I have a lot more to prove than the average person in my position, I'm always owning my whatever it is, right? I'm owning my intelligence. I'm owning that, right? And I also went through a certain, I would say like a 2 week period of just like, all right, what the fuck's going on? I'm young. People are talking to me in certain ways and stuff. And so I started to really be like, you know what? To avoid some of these self doubts or any of that, let me just throw the MS on on the name, right? Let me just throw that there so that people can see it, so that they don't be like, oh, okay, right? Let me also like be confident in talking about my experiences and what I know and stuff like that. And when people try to question it, just you know, playfully call them out while also like throwing some education in it. And so for me, a lot of like I dealt with a lot of somewhat similar, right? I had like, students who were reentry students in community college, coming up to me like, wow, I'm old enough to be your dad, right? Or like, you could be my child and stuff like that. And I'm like, yeah, it's crazy. If I was your child, you should be proud that they're teaching a course.
Yeah,
Like you should be proud.
right?
You know, but I've also dealt with the backlash of it, people being like, why should I listen to you when you're this old? And I'd never reveal my age. I don't even do it with my high school students. They think I'm like 40 plus. And so I'm all like, you never know, and so like I don't reveal my age. And one of the reasons why I don't do it is because people start to calculate how they can treat you based off of your age. And I don't ever reveal it to my coworkers, unless they already know me personally, because I think a lot of them want to be able to be like see where they're at with you.
Mm,
And when you're doing your job really well, as we are because we're successful. So like um when we're doing our job really well, especially in higher ed, right? They want something to highlight that puts us down. And that's usually they usually go to age,
yeah.
right? Or they usually go to race, right? And for me it's both. But for both of us it's both, right? And it's just like, well, you only support black students and you're young. So you still got years to go, and it's just like, don't do that. Don't do that. That's a little jealousy. I see it. Like, and for me, like I am a very like you all the work that I do, all the things that I've accomplished and stuff, I don't I don't take credit for it in spaces where I don't need to take credit for it.
Mm,
And so it's like if I'm in an all white space and they're talking about stuff, oh, I'm taking credit for all my shit. But if I'm in a black space where they're just benefiting from the things that I've done or accomplished, I don't bring it up unless somebody's like, oh wow, we want to know who did that. I'm like, oh, that was me, you know. But for the most part, like even with UBSC, like people will be like, oh, like I'll be there, I'll be in the space, and they'll be like, Jakeel's here, and I'll be like, oh no, don't tell people that I'm here because then they're like, oh, he's the creator and all this stuff, and I'm like, no, I just want to enjoy, see how people are interacting and stuff. Um, and it's interesting to me. But that I think that is one of the biggest challenges with my age is the questioning of my intelligence,
Mhm.
as well as like because I'm in K through 12 as well. I think a lot of because of my age and because I'm a black male and because of all of the things that come with the stereotypes of being a black male, I think they think that I don't have a level of like appropriateness that I can exhibit. So a lot of it is like, oh, you shouldn't interact with your students in that way. They're gonna think you like them. And I'm like, first of all, I'm a grown ass man and I know
Yeah.
how to tell little girls to get away from me. Like that's I have
Uh,
boundaries. And so I think a lot of people underestimate that. Even when I was starting grad school, I think people were like, "Oh, you can't sleep with your students, or you can't sleep with, you know, those who you work under and stuff." And I'm like, what do you think I'm out here just plotting? Like I'm just like, oh yeah, here we go. Like, no, like that's the least of my worries. And it's like I'm trying to like succeed. Why
yeah,
is that like the first thing that people think? But a lot of it is, the hypersexualization of black males and like this whole idea of like fetishizing blackness in certain spaces, especially in education. It's
yeah,
just like, oh, look at a young black man in a suit. Ooh, he looks so eligible bachelor like. And I'm just like, yo, like, I'm just trying to graduate. Like that's literally I'm just trying to graduate. Like,
you get that degree.
I'm just trying, let me just graduate and stuff. And I think that's your age starts to become the kind of like planting of questions that have nothing to do with education.
Yeah.
And and I started to realize that a lot because they'll always be like, "Oh, do you have kids? Oh, you single? You not married? I don't see a ring on your finger." And I'm like, "I'm really just trying to teach you about the basics of leadership skills. Can I really just get into transformational leadership before you notice that I don't have a ring on my finger?" Like, and it's just like I'm not I'm not like telling people like, "Oh, these are my relationship issues or these are this." It's just like my age shouldn't give you access to asking me those questions.
Right.
Uh, because one, they ain't your fucking business, and then
Period.
two, like clearly I don't have a ring on my finger. So like stop asking questions.
Yeah.
Like, hello. Um, but I think age and race have been two of the biggest things that have like caused barriers for me in higher ed.
Mhm.
Um, Along with, my personality and just me being as open as I am in higher ed. One of the things that I know that we could talk about for a while, right, is like one, we all understand, right? And I don't need to be a sociologist to understand this. Institutions are racist. Like we
Period.
all we all know that institutions were not built for people of color,
Mhm.
particularly definitely not built for black people, right? And because of that, right, working in higher education as a black person is almost like putting yourself in a position where you're going to struggle, right?
Mhm.
Because people are going to assume a lot of different things about you, whether it's like how smart you are or how you got your position. Oh, you must know somebody high up. It's like, no, I have credentials.
Yeah.
Or people are going to ask you these questions of like, where are you from? You can't be from the quote unquote hood if you got a position. Then you got the other side of things of like black people who don't necessarily understand higher ed, and so they think that you make like $100,000 because you're working at college,
For
and you're just like, bro, I'm broke. I'm like, I'm
for
broke out
real.
here just like you. Like, I still go home to the same house that I grew up in and stuff like that. Like, I like don't act like I'm out here making money because I got a degree, and that's because I'm black. Like, yes, some of my counterparts who are white or even some of my other POC counterparts, who make the exact same amount of money as me have access to a lot more opportunities for pay increases, for promotions, for all these different opportunities where I have to fight just to keep my little like level one position making the salary that I make so that, I can support myself. And so it's hard, but one of the things that I would like your input on is particularly revolving around your experience as a Black woman, right? And yes, we can talk about how successful Black women are in higher education in general, right? Highest achievement rates in graduations and master's degrees and all these different things, right? But there's still that underlying like why when Black women are in these roles, they are put in several positions. You are either everybody's sis, or you are everybody's mama,
Mhm.
or you are everybody's go-to person for everything.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to that experience as a Black woman, what has been the thing that has kept you kind of like grounded in your work, knowing that like people are going to see you and be like, there's a Black woman, let me go treat her exactly like this. Like,
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I've been really lucky to work with other Black women. Like, yes, I was the only like visible Black woman when you walked into 3700. But
mm,
then, we have a Black dean. We
mhm,
have now a Black program manager of student equity. We had Black Umoja student success liaison, all Black women, a Black administrative support assistant. And so there was literally five of us in one building.
mm,
And so there would be many, 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 like many times where we would all just end up huddling around JD's desk. And I'm not even kidding. We'd walk in, I'd see Wendy, and I'm like, oh, where are you going? You going to get coffee? And we would just all of a sudden, just all of us, you see five Black women walking to get coffee. And then we just end up just talking and just understanding one another. And that's when we kind of realized we needed that sort of space
mm,
where, I could go into Christina's office and just close the door. And I barely had even met her. Like, but there was just still this understanding of like, okay, I need to tell you what just happened because you will understand. Like,
yeah,
you as a Black woman will understand. And so we all just kind of served as each other's sounding board and like reminder, and we would remind each other too. I was just reminding Christina yesterday, like, don't let the institution exploit you.
mm-hmm,
Don't do more work than you need to do. What time is it? Why are you still working on that? It's like Black women just historically have been, we carry everything on our backs, and we'll constantly keep piling up. And you get that, image of like, oh, Black women are so strong. And it's like, okay, yeah, but we're emotion. We have emotions too. We break down too. We do have a point to where we've had enough, but there's that expectation that we continue to do more.
mm-hmm,
So I just found, my other Black women, five of us, we would just constantly remind one another to be like, okay, so take that off your plate. Like, you don't need to do that. Why are you doing that? Let that person do that. And so it was just having other Black women in that space. And now it's so different because we're virtual.
yeah,
And it was a physical space. Like, I'm telling you, we would literally, and my supervisor would walk by and he always understood. That was one thing I really felt like I was really lucky. My supervisor, white man, but he really understood. Like, if you see me huddling with Black women in the court, I'm not at my desk. He started to know that I needed that.
mm,
He wouldn't be, I never got the Shawntae, why are you not helping students? It was like, okay, Shantae's kind of taking her time. She needs that space to process and to get back to her professional self, because there comes to a certain point where you're just ready to snap on somebody. You're just
every
like,
day.
why are you asking me to make copies for you? Like, I don't work for you. And little things like that would cause you to be like, why are you coming to me? You got a printer in your office. Why
Hmm.
are you asking me to print your papers for you? Do you ask anybody else to print your papers for you? And so we would constantly just kind of be that for one another to be like, I mean, tell her, don't tell her that the printer in in the break room works, like just reminding each other that, you don't have to carry it all, you don't have to be it all.
Yeah.
And just supporting too, because sometimes we were in spaces, especially most of the black women on, and I've called this out in front of multiple people, in front of the college president, period. Most of the black women are doing student equity work.
Hmm.
And so we're doing the most work on this campus. And so a lot of things get put on our plate. And so sometimes we don't want to, like, be a part of this little committee on budgeting and whatever else. It's like, give that to somebody else. I have 35 other committees to do. I was just nominated for academic senate. And I'm like, I'm not even a full year into teaching yet.
Mm.
And it's just like, there's already this kind of like, oh, let's put her in all these different spaces and places because we see that she's a doer and
Yeah.
she's going to get it done and she's going to get the work done. And then I see some colleagues who have been working for like 3, 4 years, teaching, not on any committees, not being called into, leadership committees to present and to, and it's like, you don't get that. You don't have that expectation for not other people. It's just black women and sometimes black men, but some of the black men on our campus wiggle their way out very quickly.
Oh yeah.
Like, and they know it. Like Bruce will be the first to admit it. Like,
Yeah.
nope, easier for him to say no. A
Yeah.
lot easier. And he's tenured. So
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Like you
get
tenure
that
too.
too.
You
But
can.
it's easier for them to say no. Whereas, black women, there's just an expectation. So it's like, if I don't do it, who's it going to fall to then? You have to kind of think about that. And it's like, well, hell, who's going to do the women's suffrage march?
Yeah.
Like who's going to do that? And so we just naturally kind of take those things
Yeah.
because who else?
That that's a very important thing because for me, I think, and this is gonna I'm gonna try to tie it all in if I can do that. We'll see. So over the years, right, and you know me, and so it's like I've been embedded in just supporting Black students, Black people for a while, right? I don't need the accolades, I don't need the attention, I don't need any of that. I use, all the resources that I can. I use some of my own personal money, whatever, right? I am trying to support Black people as much as I can, right? But at the same time, I'm also starting to support other students because I work for an institution and that's what you have to do, right? I do firmly believe that all marginalized populations need support. I'm definitely going to support all marginalized populations. I'm also going to support privileged populations because they're still students. But I'm also really going to support Black students. And so one of the things that I have learned over the years, right, is like a lot of people are very quick to like support Black women in their struggle, but not support Black women in their challenges. And what I mean by that is like a lot of people will be like, wow, she's so strong. She's able to get through all these different things. I'm so proud of her. I support her, whatever she needs. But while she's going through the challenge, it's like, yo, I'm finding difficulties trying to figure out how to talk about these certain things in my class or talk about some of these things because I have white resistance or I have institutional pushback. Like, how do I do it? And they're like, oh, I don't want to get involved. You're a Black woman. You know how to do it. You've been doing it for decades and decades and decades. You figure it out. Right. And like, as much as people love to say Black men don't support Black women, the people who are supporting Black women in institutions are Black men. And so
Mhm.
it's like, we are the ones who are like, hey, like, I know you got the whole world on your back right now. Like,
Yeah.
you don't need to. You can throw that shit off. Like, worry about yourself. And so what I've learned is that Black women are exploited in higher education because people have this huge like opinion of Black women that they're just supposed to be doing everything because they are capable of doing everything. And so we're going to
Mhm.
put everything on their backs. Look at what they do in society. They support every marginalized population. They're the forerunners in every movement and whatever, right? And you get that. And so people have this idea Black women are supposed to do everything on a college campus, right? But we're also going to put barriers in front of them to see if they can actually do these things, right? And so you talked about the importance of having Black women that you could talk to and stuff like that. And I love that for Black women in all these different aspects. I support Black women, support like 100% with all of that. And I also think about my experience because when I think about would I be able to have 5 Black men walk around a campus talking to each other? No, right? Because what happens is while Black women are exploited, Black men are pushed out. And so people are always like, "Oh, well, why are there so many Black women deans and Black women coordinators and Black women in all these different spaces?" Well, it's because the Black men who try to get those positions, y'all push them out because they're Black men, right?
Yep.
And yes, I know that there's wiggle room and there's a percentage of Black men who apply to these positions who just aren't qualified, but there
Yep.
are just as many Black men who are qualified for these positions that get pushed out because
Yep.
people either have like these institutional connections or there's just this idea of what the position's supposed to be like and they don't see Black men in these roles. And so it's like, oh, well, why are you only see the Black men on college campus as faculty in
Right.
sociology or in psychology or in ethnic studies,
Yep.
right? Where are your Black English teachers? Where are your Black like geologists and stuff? Because they
Yeah.
exist, they're there, like,
Yep.
and so I've learned that like, oh, like Black women will always kind of like be around in higher education
Yeah.
because like they have more support to be there, but they also have more challenges like while existing there. Like they're
Yeah.
always going to be thrown in spaces where they have to make a decision between their identity as a Black person and their identity as a woman. Then they're going to be thrown into spaces where they have to make a decision on Black women versus Black men. And
Yeah.
that's always going to be an issue because like Black women have to like thoroughly think about, do I think about myself in this higher education space as a Black woman, right? To be able to move up potentially into dean roles and
Mhm.
at the same time maybe have to step on a couple Black men's faces to get there? Or
Right.
do I like uplift my Black men in these spaces and then never get my position?
Right.
And both are really hard decisions. And no matter which way you have to go, I understand. Like if you got to step on some Black men to like get to a dean position so you can support more Black men,
Right.
that's something you got to think about. But if you also are like, you know what, I can't because of how I live my life and circumstances and all these things, I have to support Black men no matter what that costs to me. And that's hard because you have to think about yourself in a lot of these situations. Like you are like you have a family, you have things to take care of. Some of y'all got kids out here. Y'all gotta like you got things to think about.
Yeah.
But as a Black man, I'm very fortunate that one, I don't have kids, right?
Yeah.
That I live by myself, right? That I can make decisions for Black people at the expense of a job or at the expense of like not being promoted or pushed into a space. And so with Black men, it's like, yes, we get so much pushback, right? We're targeted on campuses, right? And then
Mhm.
when we do get to our roles, we're not exploited as to the level of Black women, but we are pushed into specific spaces only.
Yeah.
Like, we want you to talk about race. Don't talk about anything else,
Yeah.
race, right? We want you to talk about like masculinity, but we only want you to talk about masculinity as it benefits all men. We don't
Yeah.
want you to talk about Black masculinity because then you're only benefiting Black men. And it's just like,
Mhm.
what? What are you talking about? Right. And so, like, that's one thing that I've really started to look at with higher ed is like, how do we support Black women, right? Also, how do we make sure that Black women aren't taking everything that like without like limiting themselves? Like, hey, like you don't have to do everything on a campus. How do we also get more Black men in, right? And there's been a huge push for the last like 10 years of trying to get Black men into these spaces by other Black men. But
Yeah.
there
Right.
hasn't really been a lot of like people who aren't Black pushing Black people, particularly Black men, into roles. Right.
Yeah.
I was fortunate to have Melanie, and Melanie was just all like, "You're good at your job. I want you on my team." And
Right.
it was like, this is the perfect opportunity to do it because certain people aren't here to block it. And so,
Really.
and I'm very appreciative of that because that's how I got into higher ed. But
Mhm.
at the same time, it's just one of those things. But Cool, I did tie it all in. But so if you were to visit incoming higher ed professional Shawntae, right, and be like, "Hey, I got some pieces of advice for you before you start this whole journey," what would those pieces of advice be?
I think, and these are things I've had to learn along the way, but it was a real struggle. But the first one, just be unapologetic in everything that you do. Don't apologize if you hurt someone's feelings, but you were just being honest. Don't apologize, for someone's interpretation of what you said, which I did a lot of when I started. I'm like, I didn't mean to make you feel that way,
Mm.
but in reality, I'm just saying it. I'm saying it as it is. So just be unapologetic. Don't be fearful. Like, and that kind of goes with being unapologetic. Is just don't be walk into spaces. If you are going to fight, like I fight for Black students every day in everything I do at that campus. And I had to get to a point, I'm like, if this is my goal, if my goal is to get X, Y, and Z for Black students on my campus, I can't be fearful when I step into a space because the college president's there.
Mhm.
Like she knows now I'm the one. Like I'm the one that's gonna say things and put them out there, and I have the privilege of doing so. I'm not viewed as threatening as some of my, particularly darker skinned Black women on campus have been, because they've tried to do some of the things that I'm able to do, and it's not received the same way. Um, and so just don't be fearful of who's in the room. Say what you have to say, do what you have to do, and just keep the goal in mind, and like don't get distracted. Don't let the institution distract you. Like this whole academic senate thing, I'm really kind of like thinking really hard. One, I don't know when I'm starting my PhD program, so I don't even know if it's going to work out. But I'm like, is this going to distract me from my old? Like, yes, on one end, it can be very beneficial being a part of academic senate, but there's no Black women or Black people really in academic senate, and so is this going to exploit me? One, and is this going to distract me from my goals of like supporting BSU, supporting Umoja? Wendy and I created the Black Community Ally training on our campus, which has, been really interesting, but also very good, necessary for our college, but just interesting. And is it going to distract me? Because I think it's easy to get distracted by trying to climb the ladder and like trying to make sure you're doing what you got to do to get tenure or get a promotion or get a pay raise. And I think a lot of the times that can distract you from why you really got into higher ed. Like I got into higher ed to show Black students that they can do this too. Like I started out as a Black student being heavily exploited, to a staff member being heavily exploited, to a faculty member being heavily exploited. But one day that won't be the case. And I think that's good for Black students to see. But the institution can just distract you with
Mhm.
all of the politics and all of the, trying to instill fear of like, oh my gosh, but don't say it like that with, the college president. It's like, well, why? Like, has no one ever said it to her like that? Maybe that's why she doesn't understand, or maybe that's why she doesn't take it as serious. Like, say it as it is. And, if this is something that they care about, they'll understand that that's how it needs to be said. So that's kind of my mentality about things now is like, if you take offense to what I'm saying, then we're not on the same page. Like, you're not really trying to make this better for Black students, for Black
Mhm.
communities on campus. You're trying to check a box. You're trying to do the DEI work that's not really, you know, benefiting students on a day to day level. So when you can take it and be like, yeah, we have an anti Black campus, you could say that flat out without getting offended, then we can start making some change on our campus. But if you can't even hear and receive that information, you're not ready to do the work. Like,
Yep. Yep.
period.
Yep. That's those are some soft look, for those of you at home listening, in your cars, on your toilets, I don't know where you all listen to this at. But like, think about those things that she just said. The goal, if your goal is supporting Black students, right? And in that, she did not exclude all students. But if your goal is supporting Black students, you cannot walk into spaces where you need to support Black students fearful, because fear will make you omit a lot of things. And so for me, one of there's a lot of different things, right? I will echo a lot of the things that you said in terms of like advice and suggestions and being unapologetic. Those are always my things, right? Um, for me, right, along with being unapologetic is being authentic. I think one of the, and I've said this on multiple episodes of this podcast, I say this in every space that I end up in, is like, I am Jakeel through and through, no matter what. I am Jakeel. I will be myself. If people don't like it, so be it. But you don't have to like me to respect the work that I do. You don't have to like me to understand my purpose. You don't have to like me to understand what I'm doing. Right. And so just constantly being authentic and not allowing like institutional norms or what I used to call institutional veterans, you know, those 20 plus year people who are there, who are just there to tell you, like, this is how you get the job. This is how you do it. This is what you say. This is who you say it to. It's all like, no, like, be authentic. If their advice is not infringing upon who you are as a person, then go for it. But if it literally forces you to transform who you are as a person, then that advice is not for you. Like, quite frankly, that role's not for you if you got to change who you are as a person, right? And with that, is like, don't get stuck on institutional salary, right? And I got stuck on that, and I can say that 100%. When I started at MiraCosta and I started looking at the different pay raises and stuff, I was like, damn, I could be making like 6 grand a month. That ain't. I was like, okay, like, shit, this work is easy too. So, and
Right.
then you get stuck in that, and then you're like, oh, I just got to keep getting hours. I just got to make sure that I can work as much as I can. I don't, you get stuck in that and you forget why you're there. And so it's all rooted back at like, why are you in the role that you're in? Why do you want to do it? Like, who are you there to serve? And then think about yourself too. Like, what are you willing to sacrifice? I'm never willing to sacrifice my sanity for shit.
Yeah.
And the only thing that I always grapple with is like, when it comes to supporting Black students, I don't feel like it's my sanity that is attacked. I feel like sometimes it's like my energy that
Mhm.
sometimes gets sucked up. And it's sometimes like my motivation towards like supporting all students. So I always have to try to be like, I know my purpose is supporting Black students, but in that, don't forget that like you still work for an institution and you still have to support all students, because that's how you'll get fired. Like,
Yeah, really.
that is how you'll get fired. And then the last thing I would say, just as pieces of advice for honestly any incoming professional, but more particularly Black professionals, is three big things. Understand you're going to experience microaggressions. That's fucking going to happen. People are going to ask about your hair. They're going to mispronounce your name. They're going to mispronounce it on purpose. Some people are going to question your intelligence. Microaggressions are going to happen. One is like learning how to navigate that, right? And understanding like, even if you want to navigate it, if you don't want to navigate it, then there's certain spaces you just don't go into. Um, Two, um, know what you know, but always try to build on what you know, as because I think as Black professionals, we can't just be good at one thing, because we have to be good at like multiple things if we want to have opportunities. Because people used to be like, "Oh, that's Jakeel. He's the workshop guy. He can present and stuff." But I'm like, "But I also know a lot of other stuff. Like, please use me for the other things that I know."
Right.
And so just trying to be multifaceted any way that you can. And then lastly is like, and this is just my recommendation, please do not fucking code switch. Like, just navigate how you navigate the politics, but do not code switch. Code
Right.
switching is going to, and there's a lot of different like quotes out there and sayings out there and poems and shit out there, but like code switching will literally introduce people to a professional that you aren't.
Yeah.
and people get used to that. And then when you're not that, because that's not who you are, people start to evaluate the quality of your work based
Mhm.
on how you code switched. And
Yeah.
some people are really good at code switching and they get stuck in it and then they think that's who they are. And then you test them one day and then they pop off and you're like, what the fuck? Who is this? And then you're like, oh wow, they were code switching for a really long time.
Yeah.
So just don't code switch. Like try to figure out how to navigate things. Don't filter yourself, but also understand where spaces you're in. But those are my pieces of advice. And so this is the end of the
Mhm.
segment. So Shawntae, is there things that you have coming up other than PhD and baby coming out? Is there things that you want people to tune into?
I mean, I'm doing a workshop for Women's History Month, Black feminism. So,
Mm,
Black women historically are left out of women's history. So, I always like to insert that. March 18th, 2 to 3 p.m. All the information's MiraCosta's website. Just search Women's History Month. Because I don't set any of that up. I don't have the link even to register. But if you just search Women's History Month at miracosta.edu, you can attend that workshop. Just reminder to just include Black women in spaces, especially when it comes to women's history, because we are, historically left out.
yeah.
So that's pretty much it for me for right now.
Do you want people to follow you on Instagram?
Yeah, yeah. So Professor Mitchum, nice and simple, at Professor Mitchum. And
Perfect.
that's it.
I'll put all that information in the description of this podcast episode. Um, and then, just my two bits of sense for you, Shantae. Um, a big purpose why I created this podcast was not only to highlight the experiences of professionals of color, so it's also to like give them a platform to talk about the shit that they do because like quite frankly, we be putting in work and people don't be recognizing our shit or they
Yeah.
don't be acknowledging us and shit. And we are the reason why a lot of these institutions are moving the way that they're moving.
Mhm.
And so, my advice for you is, understand why you're in certain spaces, whether it's because of your skin privilege or not, right? But also understand that the work that you're doing is impacting a lot more than your privilege is allowing you to. So
Mhm.
be very like I think cognizant that like you are impacting spaces way differently than like your average professional, right? And so it's like the things that you're able to accomplish, whether you're moving faster than your average person because of your connections or your privilege or whatever, right? You're still like moving in a space that's like, what the fuck? Like she's like moving. Like it was like, I'm telling you, like it went from us working together, Summer Bridge, to you teaching Summer Bridge, to you teaching sociology, to you going into a PhD program for sociology, to like who knows
Mhm.
where. So it's like just keep at that pace because I think a lot of people are going to be envious. A lot of people are going to be jealous, especially people who are like MiraCosta with us or whatever. They're, no, how. But just keep at that pace and stuff like that. And, I'm always here as a resource. I think at this point, most of my resources are already your resources. But yeah, I'm always down to kind of support you in whatever ways that I can support you. Um, and then just kind of seeing where your journey goes. But that's been another episode of Tell Me About It with Jakeel. Tune in next time, people.